bringing us to order, so let me do that. Ordre. Alors, nous sommes le Subcommittee des droits internationaux de la personne, de comité.
The Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development will begin its hearings today, 26th of October 2010. It is meeting number 27.
What we're doing today is we are undertaking a study into the situation of persons with albinism in Tasmania. We have as a witness with us Peter Ash, who is the founder and president of Under the Same Sun, who is with us by video conference. And I remind all members of the committee that our hearings today are being televised, so always just good to keep that in mind. Let's begin then by turning the floor over to Mr. Ash. Normally we invite our witnesses to Mr. Ash to talk with us for about 10 minutes, give some background information, and then we turn the floor over to questions. Although we don't hold rigidly to that, it gives you a bit of an idea. So maybe I can let you start. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to come and share with you today. As has been shared, my name is Peter Ash, and I'm the founder and president of Under the Same Sun, a Canadian international non-governmental organization. We're registered in Canada as a charity, and we also have offices in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. As you may have deduced from my presence, I have a genetic condition of albinism. Albinism is a rare genetic disorder that occurs in about 1 in 20,000 people in North America, and it is much more common in East Africa. The condition is one of those conditions that is often misunderstood in society, and what's going on in Tanzania is a gross violation of human rights. In Tanzania, the disorder is much more common, with 1 in 1,000 people being affected. Put simply, there is a crime against humanity being perpetrated against persons with albinism. The genetic disorder involves a lack of pigmentation in my hair, skin, and eyes, as you can see, and most persons with albinism are significantly visually impaired. The challenge is that in most non-Caucasian cultures, particularly African cultures, there's great myth and stigma and discrimination around the condition. It's commonly believed in Tanzania and other parts of East and West and now Southern Africa that persons with albinism have mystical or magical powers. This discriminatory belief that they are less than human, that they are cursed beings, has evolved to the point where those practicing witchcraft in certain regions of Africa have proposed the belief that obtaining and using the body parts of a person with albinism in a series of magic potions would give someone magical power. And so businessmen and businesswomen and those who are politicians in some cases and police officers will often attend the services of witch doctors attempting to gain additional success and power in life. And so the threat that has evolved in the last 2 years in Tanzania is that there have been 58 persons with albinism brutally hacked to death, slaughtered for their body parts. And 9 additional victims have been maimed, losing limbs. Additionally, at least 10 cases we're aware of where graves have been desecrated and the remains of persons with albinism have been stolen. Of course, magnifying the problem is that this export of body parts is becoming a Pan-African trait. And so there are now evidence of several countries throughout the eastern, western, and southern part of Africa, Burundi, Tanzania, Kenya, Swaziland, Mali, Malawi, Guinea, on and on the list goes. And so we believe there's a sophisticated black market trade. Evidence shows these kinds of killings are expanding. And so my purpose in Under the Same Sun is to highlight to the world's attention this, as the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon delineated it as a gross violation of human rights. I want to take a moment and just tell you a brief story. And this story will help you understand probably more profoundly than anything else what's going on in Tanzania. I remember on my first trip there about 2 years ago now, arriving in a small town in northwest Tanzania and arriving at the small and humble homestead of a farming family. And the mother began to tell me about a night in 2008 when 4 men approached their home. These men were seen in the neighborhood days earlier and had asked the little girl, Mariam, who was a girl with albinism, where she slept at night. Of course, innocently, like most 6 or 7-year-old girls would do, she pointed to her room, saying, "I sleep over there." And of course, she goes to bed as she normally does, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, they hear a banging at the door, hammering at the door, a loud pounding. And the pounding now results in the door swinging open. This is about 1 in the morning this occurs, and her and her 2 siblings were sound asleep. As they slept, men rushed toward Miriam's bed. They first lifted up the covers of one of her other siblings, her sister, who did not have albinism, who was dark-skinned. And they left her and immediately turned to the right and proceeded to the section of the house where Miriam was sleeping. They isolated her in a different part of the house, and they pinned her tiny little body down against her bed. A man produced a machete, wielded the machete, and began to slice from one end to the other end the full length of her throat. After her throat was sliced, they flipped her body over and drained her blood into a cooking pot. Upon doing so, the killers were witnessed by the other children drinking the blood. They then produced an additional machete. Another man joined in the action and sliced off her right leg, hacked off her left leg, her right arm, and then her left arm. A sack was brought for the killers for the occasion, and they produced the sack, deposited the freshly cut body parts into the sack, and they left, running away with a bag full of body parts that will quickly yield them thousands of dollars on the black market. Now add to this scene the fact that Miriam has a brother, a slightly younger brother, about a year younger than her, named Nyashi. Nyashi also has albinism, but for some reason, the killers either didn't have time or were not aware of his whereabouts. He was on another end of the room, keeping his head covered. He heard it all happen. So Nyashi gets out of his bed and sees the remains of his little sister now hacked apart. This scene was described to me by the mother, later by the uncle, and by the younger sister. The drama doesn't end here, and the trauma doesn't end because now Minyasi is at risk because his sister has been slaughtered apart, and he too has albinism. So what do we do with Minyasi? Well, the parents sent him away to a boarding school about 100 miles away, where he lives behind barbed wire with 105 other albino children. These children have all been herded into these boarding schools in horrific conditions, simply because there's no safety in their own villages. They can't go to school, they can't walk, they can't be safe in their own beds at night. And so now we have a state of affairs in Tanzania where tens of thousands of people with albinism. The World Health Organization over a decade ago estimated the number of persons with albinism in Tanzania to be in the neighborhood of 170,000. So we have a whole society of people who are living in fear, who are hiding in the bushes, who are not sleeping in their homes, who are afraid to go to work, who are not going to work, who are not going to school, simply and only because of the color of their skin. So this is clearly a situation that requires a swift response from the Tanzanian government. I've been to Tanzania 5 times, 3 times met with the Prime Minister, on one occasion with the Chief Justice, and several other government officials. The government assures us they're doing what they can. The problem is justice is coming way too slowly. Of the 58 murders that have occurred, only 3 have been brought to conviction in a period of over 2 years. The wheels of justice grind too slowly. You need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, this scenario is grinding slowly because of the stigma and discrimination persons with albinism face in Tanzania. You see, albinos are not human beings. They're substandard. They're second-class citizens. It doesn't take long to think of U.S. history in the time of the southern United States, or even in our own history in terms of the Aboriginal people, our First Nations people. How as soon as you begin to dehumanize somebody, as soon as you begin to think of someone as less than us, as inferior somehow or some way because of their culture or their skin color, it becomes easy to perpetrate acts of unspeakable horror against them. And so this is what's occurred with the albino people of Tanzania. Isolation, discrimination, lack of employment. When I was in Tanzania, me and my colleagues with albinism were called Zeru Zeru, a Swahili word meaning zero, invisible, or nothing. When I travel in the country, I travel the security detail, because not only do I have albinism, but more importantly, my voice has been loud in opposing this slaughter and confronting the wheels of justice which grind slowly. You also need to understand that belief in witchcraft in Tanzania is at an all-time high. A Pew study recently indicated that 93% of Tanzanians believe in witchcraft. And so the witch doctor is a powerful and influential member of each community. And so with witchcraft being so predominant, and if some witch doctors peddling the belief that albino body parts have magical power, we're battling a formidable enemy. And so what I'm seeking from the Government of Canada is to stand clearly on its firm historical platform of a voice for human rights, to defend the vulnerable, to defend the weak, and to send an official communique to the government of Tanzania by means of a resolution in the House of Commons, officially condemning these crimes, as the U.S. government has done in House Resolution 1088, as the European Union has done in 2008. I'm seeking the government of Canada to clearly and unequivocally condemn this violence and take a stand in joining the government of Tanzania to more swiftly and fully prosecute the offenders in these crimes against humanity. Thanks.
All right, thank you. What we'll do is go to 2 rounds of questions, 7 minutes questions and answers first round, 5-minute questions and answers second round, and that will take us to our completion time at 2 p.m. But I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to start by asking a question myself, just to give some context, Mr. Ash. You mentioned 1 person in 1,000. So Tanzania has a population of 44 million. Does that mean there are 44,000 persons with albinism in Tanzania, more or less?
Well, here's the problem. The numbers of people with albinism vary widely. I've read studies that say 18,000, and I've read the World Health Organization about 12 years ago came up with 170,000. The problem is none of these people have substantiated how they create the calculations. So the fact of the matter is we really don't know exactly how many people with albinism there are in Tanzania. The 1 in 1,000 figure, even that's a guesstimate. Dr. Murray Brilliant is a U.S. geneticist who has done a little bit of study on the origins of albinism and its occurrence in East Africa, and his best guess estimate, based on limited anecdotal observation, is that there's 1 in 1,000. So you're correct. If that figure were accurate, there'd be 44,000. But we're not certain that that figure is accurate. There may be communities within Tanzania where the figure is like 1 in 100 who have albinism. So your guess is as good as mine, but that's certainly safe to go with. That I would say at minimum there are 44,000.
Okay, that just gives an idea of the parameter of the problem. We'll start then with Mr. Silva, please.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. It's quite disturbing. And obviously, we in the committee are very much concerned. It's one of the reasons we want to have you before the committee. I want to know a few things. One is that what concerns me, it seems that the impunity, which seems to be quite prevalent in Tanzania, I mean, allowing this type of outrageous killings to take place, what the government seems to be not doing anything about it, not prosecuting anybody. There seems to be nobody being brought to justice. We know that there is issues of rituals and old traditional practices, and obviously the use of human sacrifices is part of it. And the albanist community is obviously very much affected by this. What does the government do, not just in terms of the impunity, in terms of education, in terms of going after these people, making sure law officials are also on side? And the second question I'd like to ask you is, you said that a number of parliaments, including the European Parliament, have in fact taken note and pronounced themselves on this issue. And I'd like to know very much what was the pronouncement or what type of a resolution that was put forward, so that we in the committee could see if we can also bring it forward in our parliament as well.
In answer to your first question as to what the government of Tanzania is doing, if I had to summarize, I would say a lot of talk and little action. As I said, I've met the Prime Minister a few times. We have a situation in Tanzania where there are some very good people in Tanzanian society and in the government who are genuinely opposed to these killings and who do regard people with albinism as members of society and contributing members. There's also a large number of people in society that don't view it that way. And again, I would come back to the time of, probably the closest analogy we would have would be the time of segregation and discrimination in the southern U.S. during the Civil Rights Movement. There were many, many good white people who really believed black people were equal, and they should not be killed and they should not be discriminated against. There was another group of white people, the Ku Klux Klan, and those who stood alongside them, that believed black people were non-human, that they didn't deserve the same kind of rights, and they would gladly burn them on a cross. And there was a third group of people who had some level of discrimination against black people but might not kill them, right? And so if you were to ask the government in those southern states at the time their view on black people, what do you think they would say? Well, they would all say black people are equal and they should be treated well and we oppose these crimes, but that wasn't stopping black people from being burned on crosses, right? And so we have a very similar dynamic going on in Tanzania. The official position of the government of Tanzania, including President Kikwete and Prime Minister Pinda, is that these albino killings are wrong, that they need to stop, that albinos should not be discriminated against. If you phone up or write any member of the government of Tanzania, that's what they'll tell you. Now, what's happening in practice is an entirely different thing. To give you an example, I was speaking in a church service in Tanzania about our human rights activities. And there was 32,000 members. As an outdoor assembly of 32,000 people I was speaking to. And the pastor of that church, a Tanzanian man, was translating for me because I was speaking in English and he was translating into Kiswahili. And I talked about how people with albinism were equal human beings. And I said we are not zeru, which is a derogatory term for persons with albinism. And forgive my use of the term, but for people with albinism, the term is akin to the term nigger for a black person. It's an unacceptable term, but it's a term that's used in Tanzania for a person with albinism. Even the pastor himself, who gave me a platform to speak on the issue, used the term zeru to describe me. So here's a highly educated man who has a concern for the issue, but is so uninformed and is so steeped in the discrimination in his culture around people with albinism for so long that even he uses the term. And so the government really has, as I say, the results speak for themselves. There's been 58 murders that have occurred that their own police department have documented. Only 3 of those cases in over 2 years have been brought to conclusion in court. So you tell me how important this is to them. When I ask why so slow, one of the answers I get is a lack of resources. They have a limited number of courthouses, a limited number of judges. Tanzania is a poor country. All of this is true. Tanzania is a poor country. They do need more courthouses and more judges. However, in Tanzanian history, there have been cases where other groups of people, ordinary black Tanzanian citizens, who were murdered, and the wheels of justice spun at about 10 times the speed. And so I've confronted members of the government of Tanzania saying, look, if 58 children, or normal black Tanzanian children, were murdered with their limbs hacked apart in this fashion over a period of 1.5 years, do you think it would take 2 years to get 3 convictions? And the answer is silence, because the records speak for themselves. And so the Tanzanian government is, in my opinion, throwing us a bone. They're giving us a few convictions. They're making strong pronouncements against the killings. But I believe members of the government of Tanzania use witchcraft, and some of them publicly admit to doing so. So that's not just conjecture on my part. And so the power of witchcraft is strong. And so you have to understand that for the government of Tanzania to deal with this, they're going to have to expose some politicians who may be using witch doctors, who are in fact using these body parts. And so the corruption is strong.
Now, my second question was on the issue of the parliaments, including the European Parliament, what resolutions they put forward, and the language.
I can forward the. I don't have the exact document in front of me at the moment, but there was a resolution of the European Union Parliament in Brussels back in 2008, and I can't cite the particular citation or number of the resolution, but it was an official resolution of the European Parliament in 2008, and basically it called upon the government of Tanzania to take swift action to prosecute the offenders to the fullest extent of the law, to expedite the court proceedings, to launch educational programs, and so on. So I can furnish the committee with a copy of that resolution quite easily. A Google search would find it quickly. And secondly, with respect to the United States, that was just passed months ago. It was House Resolution 1088 in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I actually sent to the committee, I think you should have gotten in your briefing notes, a proposed resolution that I am proposing the Government of Canada adopt. And I've taken elements out of both the European Union resolution and the U.S. House resolution, and we've modified it. And these are some suggested wordings that might be considered by the Government of Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ash.
Madame Deschamps, s'il vous plaît, vous avez la parole.
Madame Deschamps, you have the floor. Thank you, Chairman. I hope that the witness can hear the interpretation and can understand what I'm saying. Do you hear me?
I do, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for your testimony, your presentation, Mr. Ash. It is certainly very emotional. I was never made aware of this situation myself. And I still have a hard time believing that such crimes can exist, can be taking place in the year 2010. In your request, in your suggestion to the committee, what you're asking for is that Canada make its position clearly known to the government of Tanzania, its indignation before this lack of justice. Is Canada already present in Canada? It is present in Canada, I gather, through SDIR and does support a number of projects. I don't remember whether, perhaps I'm mistaken, but I believe that Tanzania is one of the countries that has been given priority by the Minister of International Cooperation. So I suppose that it would be possible through various projects, it would be possible to set up ways to educate the local population, because we can see that this is based on some type of belief that seems to be fairly extensive, and I suppose that also affects the areas around the border. Is this a phenomenon that exists in other countries as well? I gather that this is the case, so it would be important not only to educate the local population, but I also imagine the government, and there must be some concrete solutions put into place quickly that could be implemented in part by Canada.
Yes, there are. One thing I should comment is that Canada does receive or send CEDA funds to Tanzania. I spoke with Canada's High Commissioner to Tanzania, Robert Orr, on my last trip there in April. And Canada sends a large amount, and if I'm not mistaken, around $40 million in CEDA funds to Tanzania. It is one of the countries in Africa that does receive funding. And so I think we have influence we can exercise around that, because Tanzania is very dependent on those kinds of foreign aid contributions. And this is, in my opinion, something that the Tanzanian government can be reminded of. One concrete solution that is being put in place by Under the Same Sun, which is a Canadian NGO, as you know, is we have produced a one-hour documentary film. In fact, we employed a company in Montreal, Quebec, City Emerick, and they've worked with us, and we've produced a one-hour documentary film about the killings in Tanzania and about the discrimination albinos face. And it's a wonderful film. We just screened it in Vancouver on Saturday, and I would be happy to give each member of the committee a copy of the film. This film has been produced in English, French, and Kiswahili. And so we are going to produce these films and distribute them across Tanzania into schools, government offices, and so on. And so perhaps one partnership CEDA could have with Under the Same Sun would be to assist in the production and distribution of these films into Tanzania, and perhaps partnering with us in educational programs. So Under the Same Sun has an office in Tanzania, and we are involved in trying to educate the society, because once the society understands that people with albinism are human beings, and they're equal, and they are not ghosts, and they are not curses, then eventually the killings will stop.
I suppose that more could be done as well, because we know that it is a very poor population in this country. It might be possible to put into effect other measures. I gather that there's a very high illiteracy rate. There's also lots of unemployment. So it would appear to be a type of vicious circle, and it might be possible. This might be in part an explanation for these terrible crimes that are being perpetrated. People are hungry, and they may think that it has something to do with their survival. So there's this whole matter of education and how you can support people in a poor country.
One comment I would like to make in that respect is that while poverty is certainly a very big concern in Tanzania, I do not believe that's the primary motivator behind this particular crime. You need to understand that an albino body part sells. My arm is worth about $3,000 US. My leg is worth about $3,000 US. If you took my body and chopped it up and sold the parts on the black market in Tanzania, it would yield $250,000 US. The consumers who purchase these organs from witch doctors are not poor Tanzanians. For you to go and buy an arm for $3,000 US, you have to be wealthy. The average income for a Tanzanian is $800 a year. So the consumers that are going to the witch doctors in Tanzania and purchasing albino body parts are wealthy. They are businessmen, businesswomen, politicians, people of prominence in the community who have wealth and who have education. So while poverty is a big issue in Tanzania, it is not the primary motivator behind this crime. These people believe in witchcraft, despite their wealth and education. And so they purchase albino organs to make themselves more wealthy and more powerful.
Just a minute.
Okay.
You have 1 minute left. In the remaining minute, then, Mr. Ash, concretely speaking, can you tell us what the government could do, not only to denounce, but to express its indignation about what is happening here?
I think the government of Canada needs to pass a resolution in the House of Commons, as I've outlined in my proposed wording, condemning these killings. And I think the Prime Minister of Canada needs to make it a personal priority to directly address the President of Tanzania and tell him that it's unacceptable for us as a country, when we're providing $40 million a year of assistance, to have a partner country conducting itself this way.
Okay. Mr. Marsden, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ash, welcome. In my 4 years of sitting on this committee, this is one of the most compelling testimonies I've ever heard, and heartbreaking. To think in terms of a child being treated as you described earlier is beyond the pale for us to try to even envision. As your mind won't allow you to even envision what happened to that child. You know, normally in Western countries, such as Canada, such brutality is associated with some kind of severe mental illness. And your observation about how society has dehumanized these particular victims makes it more possible for these atrocities to be accepted in the public. And it's a horrific fact to even consider society gets to that level. But when you think in times of war, such as the Second World War, and how the militaries would assign names to groups like Geek, Gook, Kraut, or Jap, or whatever, and that was done to make it psychologically more possible for somebody to do those kinds of things in war that maybe are necessary because you get into hand-to-hand combat or whatever, but to take that back and to consider those things occurring with a child in such a manner is so hard to even find the words to deal with that. But in societies, oftentimes, you alluded to how things are so ingrained. A man I worked with for 30 years who was a peace activist, and there was an exchange of money one time, and he said to the person across from him who made a nickel error in the change, and he was giving him the nickel back, and he said, "That's so high me of me." And that just showed that this man had no concept of what that word meant. It was just a word for cheap to him. It had nothing to do with the Jewish community. And so you have a culture here in Tanzania that is viewing this in that manner, has become so ingrained in it. So there's a huge, huge education component that has to be. It is wonderful to have the various governments, the EU and the United States, and hopefully, and I would expect Canada to make these pronouncements. But on the other side is, how do you come to terms? How would you think the world can come to terms with the kind of level of education required to bring that society back from where they're at?
The answer is public education. And that's, the two mandates that Under the Same Sun has. We are really the only international NGO in Tanzania working on this issue. Although recently we've been fortunate to forge some partnerships with the Red Cross and UNICEF, who have both said to us that we support you as the NGO in Tanzania on this issue. And so our goal, as I said earlier, is primarily through the distribution of this film. The largest private media network in Tanzania is owned by a man by the name of Reginald Mengi. He's become a personal friend of mine, and he is a strong advocate for human rights and of the disabled community. And he has told me that he will take our film and broadcast it on primetime television across Tanzania. And we have strong relationships with the media. Tanzania has a free press. That's one beautiful thing about this country that some African countries don't have. Freedom of the press has been a huge asset to us. And so whenever I land in the airport in Tanzania, I have a dozen journalists wanting to interview me. So, what we do is through constant public education and also taking people with albinism who have been successful in Tanzania. We have a fellow who's a partner with us who is a lawyer. He's the dean of the Faculty of Law and has albinism in Tanzania. And he is one of those few, and he makes a voice known. So you're right. The answer is public education. It's not going to happen overnight. When Hitler, how did Hitler motivate a country to kill millions of Jewish people? Because he somehow convinced many of them that the Jewish people weren't like us, right? They were inferior to us. So we could experiment on their bodies for medical research because they were animals, basically. And so, and it's interesting to me to see how the same dynamic is at work in Tanzania. So public education is a big part of it. And, we're doing that through our educational programs, brochures, films, and so on. Even in our office in Tanzania, we have 10 people with albinism on our staff, all of whom have university degrees. Just, if you'd permit me one brief vignette, there's a presidential election underway right now in Tanzania. It's actually going to happen October 31st. And witchcraft is often used during times of elections. Candidates consult witch doctors to try and get elected. And in the process of this election campaign, there was a man with albinism running in the opposition party for an MP. So he's running for a seat as an MP. This is an albino man. The opponent, who was the incumbent MP, did not have albinism. The opponent and his campaign manager publicly said that people with albinism have bad memories and don't think well due to a lack of vitamin C. The sun affects them and they don't think well. This was a public statement made by a member of parliament and his campaign manager of his opponent. And he said, you shouldn't vote for my opponent because albinos don't think well. Well, we had the wonderful opportunity to convene a press conference and have this man who works with us, who is an albino lawyer, who's the dean of the Faculty of Law, say, I assure you, sir, my memory works very well. I'm the dean of the Faculty of Law. And I assure you that people with albinism will remember for a long time what you've said. And so education, advocacy are the solutions. And so to the extent that perhaps our High Commission in Tanzania, through the High Commissioner there, can come alongside us and support us in this endeavor in Tanzania, we could make a difference on the ground.
1 minute left.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious, to my mind, isolating the witch doctors and their practices would be one component of this. What's the literacy rate like in Tanzania? How difficult is it going to be to get past those barriers that would provide, number one? And number two, you've asked for a resolution from the Parliament of Canada, and I would hope, too, that you would see a statement from this committee as being helpful as well.
Very much so. I believe we need to get the ball rolling with a statement from this committee, which we're hoping might spur on a resolution. So a statement from this committee on letterhead to the government of Tanzania would make a huge impact. I can tell you last year, I was at the United Nations in Geneva in September of last year, and I had a chance to speak before the Human Rights Council. And it was interesting. After I gave my speech, I shared with them for 2 minutes, and all the member nations were present, about this crime against humanity. As soon as I finished my speech, a man ran over to me across the room who was the chair of the Human Rights Commission for Tanzania. And you better believe that he was on edge because now this dirty little secret had been exposed for the world to see. And so that's frankly what we're banking on here, is that international pressure, because the government of Tanzania, it's a democracy, and so they do want to be thought of well in the West, and they do want the funding support they get from Western countries. And so a letter from this committee and a letter from the House, and perhaps a letter from our High Commissioner in Tanzania, we believe would be of great assistance.
We turn now to Mr. Hebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ash, for your testimony. It was truly compelling. I don't want to even reflect too long on the story that you told, but it certainly moved me. Last week, Canada hosted a conference with Commonwealth parliamentarians, and among those present were 2 elected officials from Tanzania. And I raised this issue with them, and they expressed a great deal of concern, mentioned that the government had been taking steps, talked about the implementation of the death penalty for people caught attacking people with albinism, mentioned as well that there was a current sitting member of Parliament who also had albinism. Can you confirm that that's in fact the case?
Yes, there is a member of Parliament with albinism in Tanzania. Alshana Kwagir, she's a friend of ours, and we're thrilled that she is. that doesn't change the fact that there's still 58 people have been murdered and only 3 have been brought to prosecution.
Absolutely, and I think you're spot on when you indicate that a greater motivation on the part of the government to prosecute needs to be instilled in them. I also wanted to mention that when this subject matter came up last week, we made a request from the High Commission in Nairobi. My understanding is that the High Commissioner for Kenya is also responsible for Tanzania. And the information that we have before us indicates that officials met with representatives from under the sun last Friday. So I think your request has been granted in advance, and hopefully further meetings can occur as well. Certainly more work needs to be done. Now, one of the statements that this member of parliament from Tanzania mentioned to me on Friday as well last week was that the government had provided security or police to be with people with albinism. Do you know, is that in fact true as well?
No, it's not true at all. I've been to the affected regions 5 times now. And in every community where murders have been taking place, the only security present were the security guards I brought to protect me and my team. Yes, there are police in those villages, just like there are in every village of Tanzania. But I've been to the homes of dozens, if not hundreds, of people with albinism, me and my staff, and we've never seen police officers anywhere in proximity to those homes. So maybe they've thrown on an extra patrol or 2, perhaps. We have not seen evidence of it. And with respect to the parliamentarian's comment that they've implemented the death penalty in this case, let's be clear. The death penalty has been on the books in Tanzania forever for capital murder. So they didn't put it on the books to protect people with albinism. It's been on the books forever in the case of any capital murder. And so they've done nothing unique or special about people with albinism. The three cases that have been brought to conviction, there have been a few men in those cases, in those 3 cases that have been convicted, and a few of them have been sentenced to death. They're sitting on death row. No one's been actually executed in Tanzania for 15 years. Okay? And so while it is true that the death penalty is on the books in the law of Tanzania, as it was in most Commonwealth countries at one time, including Canada, what's not true is that was brought in some kind of a response to these albino killings.
Okay. Another question that I had was, they may be saying that there is the death penalty, as you pointed out, for people who commit murder in these instances, but what about a disincentive or a criminal code prohibition against simply not killing them, but taking their limbs or taking their body parts and leaving them alive? Has any work been done on that front?
There is an act in Tanzanian law. It's the Witchcraft Act. I believe it's of 1928. And there's one other act that deals with the trafficking in human organs. It's already a criminal offense in the Criminal Code of Tanzania to traffic in human organs. It's already illegal. And this is one of the challenges we've faced in the criminal prosecutions, is that because the charges are often murder, if you can't actually, the burden of proof in a capital murder is very high. So if you can't prove that someone was involved in the murder, there's been a number of cases where people have gotten off. And these, for some reason that we can't explain, well, I have an explanation for it. The reason is that witchcraft is so endemic in the culture that part and parcel of the practice of witchcraft is the possession of either animal body parts and the use of animal sacrifice, or in some cases, human sacrifice. And so really the issue here is that there's very powerful and influential people who have thousands of dollars to buy albino body parts. These are not poor Tanzanian farmers who are illiterate. These are educated businessmen and politicians who are purchasing these body parts. And what do you think? If you're a member of parliament and you're using a body part of an albino and you're ordering it for $3,000 from your local witch doctor, how excited are you going to be about pushing the Justice Department to prosecute the offenders? Because once you get that guy on the stand, the witch doctor, and he says, "Sir, who ordered the body parts from you?" What do you think? When the politicians themselves, some of them, are involved in this crime, ordering the body parts. The witch doctors have told us some of their clients are politicians. I've had politicians tell me that they know other politicians who consult witch doctors, but they won't name them. And so we've got a conspiracy of silence because there's people in tremendous power in this country that use witchcraft, and if this thing were really blown open, it would blow open the government of Tanzania, including the cabinet perhaps.
So it sounds like you're satisfied with the legal steps that are in place to prosecute, but you're dissatisfied, and I think we would agree with the motivation behind the prosecution and lack of motivation there.
The lack of political will, because I believe that there would be an incrimination factor attached to the politicians. And so, yeah, the criminal code of Tanzania is not the problem. Enforcement is the problem.
I just want to say in closing that I've reviewed your document, including your proposed motion, and I think it reads very, very well. And I will encourage my colleagues here on the committee to give it strong consideration, even perhaps this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
We move now to the second round of questions. These are shorter. They're going to be 5 minutes each. And the order is changed. Our clerk has provided me with a helpful card here. So the order is now going to be Liberal, Conservative, Bloc Québécois, NDP, and that will complete the amount of time we have available. So we begin with Professor Kotler, please.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Sylvan.
I'll divide my time with Professor Kotler. In fact, our time is very limited, so I think I'll make it very brief. Just want to ask Mr. Ash if there's, I know we're specifically dealing with Tanzania, but witchcraft is practiced all over different parts of the world, even Africa, not just in Africa. But I'm wondering, is this prevalent in other parts of Africa? Are you aware of it? And what are the other governments in those countries doing as well to combat this issue?
The problem is across the continent of Africa. People with albinism across Africa are widely discriminated against. They have been for hundreds of years. There have been 15 documented killings in the country of Burundi, which borders Tanzania. And in fact, it's sad to say, to report to the committee, that I got word Saturday morning that Tanzanian killers crossed the border into Tanzania on Thursday. Just a few days ago, 5 Tanzanian men crossed the border to Burundi, and they kidnapped a 9-year-old boy. They brought him across to Tanzania, we believe. They killed him, dismembered him, and threw his body in a river that runs along the Tanzanian-Burundi border. And so a killing occurred just a few days ago. There's been documented cases of killings as well in Swaziland in South Africa, which really worries us because it's a whole different part of the continent. 2 11-year-old albino children were killed there about a month ago. In Guinea, there have been 3 albinos killed in the last 3 months. In West Africa, in Kenya, a mother killed her 4-year-old, her newborn albino baby. And also we have a case of a man from Kenya luring an albino friend across the border to Tanzania, and he was going to sell him to witch doctors in Tanzania, and he was actually exposed and apprehended and arrested by police. So yes, the problem is transcontinental, and the export of the body parts is supplying a fairly wide demand. A man was arrested about 1.5 years ago with the head of an albino baby in his luggage, and he was carrying the head into the Democratic Republic of Congo. He was a Tanzanian businessman, and he said he had buyers lined up in Congo to purchase the head by its weight. And so yes, this is a transcontinental issue, or sorry, a Pan-African issue that does need to be addressed more widely than just Tanzania. But we're focusing for the moment on Tanzania because it's the biggest number of killings we're aware of.
Yes, I want to follow up directly on your comments, Mr. Ash. You spoke about, and rightly so, the importance of public education within Tanzania. My question is about, because of what you just mentioned, the Pan-African character, about public education beyond Tanzania for purpose of mobilizing awareness and understanding, which would have an impact both within Tanzania and beyond. So 2 specific questions. Number 1, have you sought to bring the matter before the African Commission for Human Rights and People's Liberties because of the Pan-African character? And 2, have you sought to bring the matter up before the United Nations Council on Human Rights?
Yeah, first, with respect to the African Commission, we have not yet. We've been very busy on this issue. We've appeared before a lot of governments and a lot of committees, and that's not one we've gotten around to yet. Having said that, when I was in Geneva last year in September, speaking before the Human Rights Council, and so in answer to your second question, yes, we have presented to the Human Rights Council in Geneva. Videotape of my presentation is on our website, and you can watch it. It's also on the UN website. But when I was in Geneva last year making that presentation, I did have the opportunity to meet with ambassadors of several African countries and highlighting this. And of course, the interesting thing about it is a lot of times it's always not in my backyard. You know, some African countries seem to take delight in the fact that there's not so many documented cases in their country, and they're happy about the fact that it's someone else's problem. what we've discovered is that a lot of times these killings happen and they're not documented. As you know, many African countries don't have great freedom of the press. And so in countries where freedom of the press is more limited, or the press are fearful of criticizing the government, ritual killings and witchcraft-related killings occur, and they often go unreported. So because there aren't reports and because there aren't police documentations, one should not conclude that discrimination and killings aren't going on. Tanzania happens to have a very free press, and it was through the BBC in 2008, Vicky Ntatema, the BBC bureau chief, exposing this story that it got on the world's radar. And so, yes, more Pan-African education is needed, and we're doing our best to be a part of that.
Thank you.
That basically uses up the time available for Liberal questioners. We turn now to Mr. Sweet from the Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it just seems so much more painful that in a continent where it's tough to avoid the risks of life by AIDS and by malaria, by lack of infrastructure and clean water, that there's also this epidemic that is so atrocious. Mr. Ash, I just wanted to thank you and thank, of course, all of your colleagues, volunteer and staff that do the great work of Under the Sun, both here and on the continent of Africa. And I just want to, with my time, just mention what the official government position is and then ask my colleagues to agree on a point here on Mr. Ash's suggested motion. I just want to read into the record, Mr. Chairman, the official government policy right now. Canada condemns in the strongest possible terms the human rights violations that are being carried out against persons with albinism. Canada supports actions to mitigate human rights violations being carried out against albino minorities in Tanzania and beyond. Canada actively pursues opportunities where possible to support the protection of human rights of persons with albinism in Tanzania. And maybe to take no, that is just reading into the record what the official government policy is. But you can take this as a motion where I'm going to ask for unanimous consent, and that is that what Mr. Ash gave us was a well-articulated motion. I think we probably will do away with the whereases on the first page, but on the second page of Mr. Ash's submission, where the 6 points resolve the Government of Canada, I would like to ask my colleagues for unanimous consent that, bearing in mind that the clerk and the researcher will need to wordsmith it to a degree, that we could have unanimous consent that this would be a statement from the committee to ask the government to affirm that that's resolved by the Government of Canada.
So everything from resolved onwards, is that correct?
That's correct. Again, with the premise that our clerk and researcher may need to wordsmith it, not for content, but for grammar and for protocol, I guess.
Are you actually moving a motion to this effect, or are you asking us to give consent for the clerk to revise it and bring it back to the committee?
Yes, for the clerk to revise it and bring it back to the committee.
The okay.
With that content, yes. All
right. With that in mind, would be agreeable to that? Okay, good. We'll do that, and that leaves you with, you've still got 2 minutes, Mr. Sweet.
No, that's fine, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you to Mr. Ash and all the great work that he and Under the Sun do.
All right. Madame Deschamps, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Chairman. Perhaps in conclusion, Mr. Ash, I could find out during your stay in Tanzania, how were your actions perceived, your actions and your presence on the part of people with albinism and by the population at large? I'd like to know whether your presence did disturb the Government of Canada in view of the type of action that you've undertaken and the sort of things that you've denounced.
The reaction to my presence is, for the most part, quite welcome. The people in the albinism community are absolutely thrilled every time me and my team arrive in Tanzania, because I remember the very first time I arrived there about 2 years ago, there was tears rolling down the faces of most people with albinism, because they were suffering and they were alone and they didn't think anybody in the world knew about their plight or cared about them. And I need the committee to understand that I have a very personal connection to this, because although I'm not Tanzanian and I'm not African, these people share the same genetic code that I do. And so when I would come over and look them in the eye and I would say, I'm your brother, they would get it. And so the fact that a person with albinism would come and take the effort to fly halfway around the globe and look them in the eye and hold their hand and hear the stories, meant a lot to them. And so I have tens of thousands of brothers and sisters in that country who celebrate my arrival. With respect to the government, the reaction is mixed. Some are pleased to greet me and cordial and kind, and somehow I get the doors of power open to me every time I show up, whether it be the Prime Minister or the Chief Justice or Cabinet Ministers. They all take my calls and meet me. To some degree, I think that's because of international media pressure and international governmental pressure. They want to be seen to be doing something, and so they want the media coverage. They know the media are following me everywhere. And so if they turn down my invitation to talk to me, that's going to be noted in the local media, and it's not going to look good for them. And so most government politicians are kind and polite and listen to me, and then I go home and they don't do as much as they need to do.
I just wanted to, I think I heard correctly that Madame Deschamps was asking about the Canadian government, but I think the witness answered about the Tanzanian government. I'm not certain whether I just want to make sure there's some clarity in that answer.
Did I misunderstand the question? Were you asking about the Canadian government's response?
Non, non. Je suis désolée, Monsieur Sweet, j'ai déjà demandé ça dans mon premier.
Oh, I already asked that in my first question, Mr. Sweet. I simply wanted to find out what the reaction was on the part of the Tanzanian government. Thank you.
J'ai quelques minutes encore.
I have a few minutes left, do I? In view of the fact that you were in the presence of Canadian diplomats during your stay in Tanzania, can you tell us whether the diplomats in this country have taken steps to denounce what is taking place? The type of relations that may exist with the Tanzanian government and the NGOs, have any measures been taken?
By the government of Tanzania or the government of Canada in Tanzania?
Du gouvernement du Canada, s'il vous plaît.
On the part of the government of Canada.
My contacts in Tanzania, with respect to the government of Canada, have very much been confined to the High Commissioner. And Tanzania, just for the record, does have its own High Commissioner, Robert Orr. It's not through the embassy in Nairobi. We actually have a High Commission in Tanzania, and Robert Orr is the present High Commissioner. He has been very supportive. We had an awareness-raising screening of our film last April. It was a big event with a lot of dignitaries, and the keynote speaker was Robert Orr. So he has been very helpful and very vocal, and I believe in my proposed resolution for the House, I actually quote comments from Robert Orr about this. And so what we need, though, is to see a stronger partnership than Robert simply making statements. If the government might be able to give some direction to CEDA to perhaps get involved in more concrete support actions, that might also be helpful.
Kristen, you'll be our last questioner today.
Well, it's not going to be so much a question, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ash, I just want to commend you on the individual courage that you have. I mean, it's not been said in this place at this time, but you are very much at risk when you go to this country, and I'm sure you're well aware of that.
Yes,
I'm not alluding to the government in any way, but the people who would love to sell you. And it's such a horrible, horrible thought. But the other thing that I took from your commentary here today is how you see yourself and how the people of this country see you as somewhat of a, pardon the pun, and it's not intended one, but a white knight. You are a person who puts a face to this from another country, and the importance and the significance of that here today can't be overstated. I want to commend Mr. Sweet for moving this acceptance of this resolution that you have, and I think it's important that this committee not only arm you with this resolution, but with a strong statement from the committee aside from that resolution going forward, so that when you meet with government officials, you'll be able to hand to them quite directly the commentary from our government and from this committee. This is something that has got to be wiped off the face of the earth. It is so reprehensible, and in fact, as I think it was Madame Deschamps said, it defies understanding and acceptance. You know, the committee members here are not that naive, but you struggle with, even when you look at the pictures you supplied to us of the child that was mutilated, and you look at that picture and you try to say to yourself, how is it possible that a person, much less a segment of society, can do this? So I'm really impressed with you, sir, and I just wanted to say so, and thank you very much for your good work.
Thank you. Just one question, if I might. The action of the committee at this point is the recommendation was made earlier to adopt this wording. Am I to understand as well that that would then proceed to the House? What is the mechanism to move this beyond this committee to getting a resolution in the House of Commons? And is that part of the committee's plan?
Well, the committee would adopt a resolution, and then that can be publicized. That's, in a sense, as far as it goes. However, it's then a matter, any member of the House of Commons can suggest that the House unanimously adopt a resolution. That seems to be the likeliest course to have the House adopt something. And then it's a matter for the House leaders to debate among themselves. They do that sort of thing in-camera sessions, typically on Tuesdays.
My question then following on that would be, is there a member, all of the members of this committee are presumably members of Parliament, is there someone on this committee who is planning to do that?
I think there's a lot of champions on this committee for that. That's my guess.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah. You still have a wee bit of time left, Mr. Marsden? Done? Okay. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to ask a question then. Again, just to get a bit of a sense here. In the initial letter of contact that you sent via Mark Warawa's office, Mr. Ash, you made reference to the fact that there are killings as widely spread as Swaziland, which is considerably to the south of Tanzania, and as far north and west as Guinea, which suggests to me, although maybe I'm reading too much in here, it suggests to me that this phenomenon of witchcraft, or this belief that the body parts of persons with albinism is a kind of a spreading sort of notion that is getting worse, as opposed to being sort of an atavistic belief that's fading away?
You know, the thing is, we're not sure if it's getting worse or it's just being more reported. We do know that people with albinism in Africa have been discriminated against in a variety of countries for a long, long time. So we have data that discrimination and stigma against albinos has been very long-standing across the continent in sub-Saharan Africa. What we are seeing, though, you're right, is more reports of these killings. And so we're not sure why that is. There's two theories. One is that there is a trans-border trade in parts. And so maybe because the police presence or the international pressure is on Tanzania, perhaps the killers are getting the body parts supplied from other countries. Or it could be that witch doctors are sharing the idea across borders. We're not really sure why it's going across the continent. We know that it is. But we do believe, we do have evidence. A few weeks ago there was a killing in Burundi, and the killers took off and fled across the Burundian border to Rwanda. And as I say, we have a number of documented cases where parts are going across the borders back and forth. And so one of the things we are asking for, and I didn't mention this earlier, one of the things we're asking the government of Tanzania to do, and perhaps the government of Canada could raise this in its commentary, in its letter, is that Interpol become involved. Interpol has a role here when there is, human trafficking in organs across country lines. It might be that if police departments in these affected regions coordinated their efforts, we believe there's a good likelihood there's an international ring in the supply of these body parts going on.
All right. Thank you very much. I think everybody on the committee is very grateful to you for attending, particularly on such short notice, and let me just offer thanks on behalf of everybody on the committee. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee members, I wanted to just take a moment to deal with some administrative business before we adjourn. There was a letter that I had been requested to prepare. It's been circulated to you regarding the status of the committee and the possibility of becoming a full status committee. I'd like you to look at that and get back to me with your comments. This includes the edits put in by other members. That's one item. Secondly, we have a draft schedule that I prepared. It is only advisory. I believe that's been circulated to you as well. So please take a look at that and be prepared to come back with comments. You could do it at the next meeting, but I suggest if you feel like buttonholing me between now and then so that we can take your comments into under advisement, that would be helpful. I do meet with the clerk in between our meetings, and we can make adjustments based on your comments. The sooner you get them to us, the better. Finally, last thought, members have put forward topics they think ought to be discussed. we would really be grateful if you could give us the names of proposed witnesses so we can contact those witnesses to have them here either on the dates we've suggested on the draft schedule, or if those dates don't work, based upon the availability of those witnesses, we will then, of course, try and change the dates and come back to you with that. So those items of business, please keep in mind. And finally, very important, we all know that I was sent to the main committee to deal with them looking at our UPR report and our Iran report, and I can report back to you vis-a-vis the UPR report that it was adopted by the main committee with a slight amendment, but not, I think, a serious amendment. The intention of the chair is to report it to the House probably next week, perhaps on the 3rd of November. The Iran report is likely to involve some additional hearings. So you can speak to your own party members on the parent committee to find out more details if you so desire. With that being said, we are adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody.